Thanksgiving, and welcome to the show. I'm Megyn Kelly. We've got a huge show for you today with lots of helpful tips for Thanksgiving when it comes to eating and shopping, which is on all of our minds. But first, we begin with the news. We are learning more this morning about accusations from a former model who says that Def Jam Recordings founder Russell Simmons sexually assaulted her when she was just 17 years old. And she says movie director Brett Ratner stood and watched. The accuser says it is time to shine a light on Hollywood's abhorrent behavior and women's reluctance to talk about it. Keri Khalighi was just 17 in 1991 when she says she ran into Brett Ratner and Russell Simmons at a New York City music video casting call. 34-year-old Simmons was already a successful music mogul as founder of Def Jam Recordings. Ratner was breaking into the music video scene. Khalighi says Ratner asked her to join them for dinner, and that Simmons then invited both of them up to his apartment. She says she thought she was going to watch a new music video, but says instead, things took a terrible turn. Khalighi says as the video played, Simmons began sexually assaulting her. She says as she was fighting Simmons off, she looked over to Ratner for help. No help came, and Khalighi now believes Ratner was in on it. She says Simmons ripped off her clothes, trying to force her to have intercourse, while Ratner looked on. Simmons denies it, saying, "I completely and unequivocally deny the horrendous allegations of non-consensual sex against me with every fiber of my being. I know Keri Khalighi and remember the weekend in 1991 that she has referenced. Everything that happened between us 26 years ago was completely consensual and with Keri's full participation." Through his lawyer, Brett Ratner told the LA Times he had no recollection of Khalighi asking him for help and denied witnessing her protest. At least 14 women have now publicly accused Brett Ratner of sexual misconduct. Ratner's lawyer categorically denies all of the claims. And now, in an exclusive interview, I am joined by Keri Khalighi from Los Angeles. Keri, thank you so much for being here.
Hi.
Let's go back to that day when you were just 17 years old, from the heartland, trying to make it as a model, and you found yourself inside Russell Simmons' apartment with Brett Ratner there. What was the first sign you had that something was wrong, that there was trouble?
Well, as the video was playing, Russell came over and started making advances. And at the time, I thought it was a joke. And it became increasingly apparent that it wasn't a joke. And he continued his advances. And I looked over at Brett at that point for help. And I'll never forget the look on his face. It was in that moment that I realized, I think this was their plan all along. There was no help that was going to come.
How did you communicate, I don't want this?
By body language, by it's very apparent when somebody doesn't want an advance to happen. My body was closed, I was frozen. I looked over at Brett and asked for help because I thought we were friends. It was a very confusing and terrifying moment.
Later, Russell Simmons would write a book talking about his friendship with Brett. And he talked about how Brett Ratner was willing to do anything to be of use to Russell, who was like a father figure to him, and wrote, after he hung around a bit and figured out this is Simmons, that I liked models. He made it his business to take me to every model's apartment he could find. I mean, when you read that years later, how did that put into perspective, if at all, what happened to you?
It made complete sense. That in the fashion circles, it was widely known, their reputation for being kind of modelizers and preferring that kind of company. And it made a lot of sense. It made my story make a lot of sense.
I know you told the LA Times that Russell forced you to perform oral sex on him, that you acquiesced, feeling you had no other choice. And then you say a second assault took place. What happened then?
Right. Well, you know, a part of my story that I think is really important to talk about in this conversation that's happening nationally right now with sex abuse coming out. After the oral sex part of the story, I stayed. I didn't run out. I stayed and I took a shower, and then an additional sexual assault happened there. And I think that part of the story is an interesting piece to shed some light on in regards to why women, A, don't speak out right away, and why there's a lot of shame around these kind of stories. Because a lot of times they don't follow a cut and dried, black and white kind of storyline of an assault happens, and then the minute you can, you run out. You know, I've learned in a lot of the work that I've done around this issue that there's a whole spectrum of variety response of fight, flight, or freeze. And I certainly froze, and I certainly did what I could to normalize what was an incredibly hard to process situation. It's hard to process all of that in the moment as a 17-year-old, really as any age, but it took me years to process this experience.
Did you blame yourself? Did you shame yourself, as we've heard so many women say?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. There's a lot of guilt and shame involved in what happened.
What is it like for you now that he comes out with that statement saying, absolutely not, it was consensual? He says, hey, we spent the weekend together. There was somebody else in the apartment. You know, everything was totally consensual with her.
I don't even know what to say about everything was consensual, and I had full participation. I almost don't even want to speak against that because it's ludicrous. There's so much. Russell and I have actually had a face-to-face confrontation around this. We've had phone conversations where we've had a conversation about what happened, where there was no dispute of what we were talking about. We were both talking about what happened on that night. And he actually apologized. And part of what's so confusing and re-traumatizing is what he's speaking about privately with me is completely different than what's come out publicly. And that's the piece that's been really upsetting, disappointing, and quite honestly, just repugnant with the hypocrisy and the lies and the denial.
What do you make on a larger scale, Keri, about what's happening in this country right now as women are coming out and telling these stories? I mean, what did that do to you sitting there? By the way, she's 9 months pregnant and expecting her third daughter on Monday, and has decided to do this interview. So why? Why did you feel it was important?
Yeah, this is not what I want to be doing right now. This baby really wants to come and is waiting, I think, for some of this to settle. I'm coming out now because I really, really think this is such an important empowerment revolution, to use your words, that's happening right now. This is an incredibly potent and time full of potential to really, really change things up. And if I can use my experience to further this conversation and to facilitate change in any way, it might not be right now that we see the fruits of this labor, but I am bound and determined to make this environment better and safer and more empowered for my daughters and for the sons and daughters of the future generation. And it starts with conversations like this.
Good for you. And I appreciate what you said, fight, flight, or freeze, because we forget about the freeze part of it. And so many women have described their reaction in the moment just that way. Keri, all the best to you and your girls. And on Monday, when we hope baby number 3 does arrive safely, we'll see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Wow. Wow, right?
Hello, Today fans. Thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking that button down there and click on any of the videos over here. to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives.